Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on the perception that, uh, that some structure in the lower part of Tibet, when Zangpo turns southwards and enters India, is going to be very, very disastrous for Brahmaputra downstream. This has been the topic of many, many newspaper articles, and is a very saleable but not substantiated news item. If you go to Assam, everyone probably is up in the arms on that bad Chinese dam. Now, Brahmaputra is a river which receives 20% of its flow from Yarlung, and 80% of its flow is generated from the southern slope rivers of Himalaya, starting from Lohit in the east, all the way down to Tista in the west. There are at least several hundred rivers, rivulets, feeding into Brahmaputra as it flows from east to west before it takes the turn towards Bangladesh. And in these Indian tributaries, at least 350 dams are being planned, which are going to have much more serious impact on the flow of Brahmaputra than one perceived dam on a small tributary to Brahmaputra, which feeds 20% of water. So when we talk of that bad dam in China, we should also talk of those 300 dams that are being built in Arunachal Pradesh on the Indian tributary of Brahmaputra, because they are going to have 300 times more impact on the flow. And already Assam is quite threatened by one possible dam break. If it happens, it will come to the Brahmaputra Valley in a big way. And those risks have not been properly assessed. But one of the colleagues and one of the speakers from IIT Guwahati, is working on the problems of the Brahmaputra Valley from the series from 350 dams that are committed in Arunachal Pradesh. So I think we should also look at the ecological holism from the ecologically holistic perspective on this Brahmaputra, that it is not on at the end of Yarlung that some power plant is being hydropower plant is being made, but the 350 hydropower plants that are being made in the southern slope of Himalaya. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Need for the Farakka barrage now, in the sense that if you're largely saying that it's about preserving flows in the lower reaches of the Hooghly.
Why don't you come out?
That's fine. So is there a case being made that you could actually either demolish the Farakka barrage, remove it, and not much would change in terms of downstream impacts now? Is that one possibility in some sense? And there are now cases across, recently in the US, you were demolishing dams which have been put forward. So that's the first issue. And secondly, what is the state of research on building dams on rivers of the varieties that you mentioned, which have carrying a lot of silt? Is the dam designs put together? Do we now have the designs to do so? Because I remember the early work on Baglihar, there was a big issue about what exactly the kind of designs are, and gates and so on and so forth. So that's the status of the research on how do you dam these rivers, if at all is it possible. And secondly, I was struck by the fixed points that you mentioned when you're doing your meander mapping. You mentioned there were certain fixed points on that particular river. And if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what determines those kinds of fixed points in some structures. The second question, Dr. Panda, is I'm a little confused at this point in time. I can see you have a philosophical approach that depends on restricting urbanization, controlling consumption, and that's one structure. And I'm just wondering whether you see that as the only way forward, and that, to my mind, has a lot of pushback, especially in a country like ours with current levels of consumption. On the other hand, in your response right now, you pointed out at least two levels of technical problems. One, the fact that these three problems. One, the fact that the use of water is essentially illegal. Two, that they use more water than they should. And three, and this is in common with Jayanto's stuff later, the cumulative impact, that's one of the things that you broadly pointed out, looked at Chhattisgarh and Orissa, the cumulative impact, the variety of projects is not taken into account. Everything being looked at in a single way. And that sort of comes again to what Mr. Bandyopadhyay was talking about, that these 300 dams are all being evaluated on an individual basis. Is that the right way of thinking about it? And is it true that our environment impact assessment and environment approval systems essentially do not take cumulative impact as much into account as it should? And that's largely because people who are involved in that process are either not sufficient, either don't have the modeling capabilities or the modeling software to be able to take these things into account. I'm not quite sure. The first question is that a correct assessment? And B, then we can think about the issues. The second, whether the issue is this, that I understand that there are limitations on the sharing of data for the Brahmaputra, Ganga in these rivers. What is it that prevents us from doing really high quality work on our peninsular rivers? And why, or is it actually being done? And do we know a lot more about the Krishna, the Godavari, the Mahanadi, and the Narmada than we do about these other? Or is there something that's more broader that you are pointing out, that there is something deeper within the way in which you look at these questions, that we just don't have the scientific resources to look at these problems at this point in time?